So hello everyone, this is the fourth episode of the Founders Interviews by S4S. S4S is the student pillar of the Community for Learning and Innovation, which is a body of the university. And we try to improve and innovate education on campus, mainly through supporting different partnerships, which spend their energy doing that. So one of these partnerships is the Psychedelic Science Collective, founded here by the lovely Anna Olen. And she's going to tell us a little bit about herself and about the collective. So please tell us a little about yourself. Anna, thank you for being here. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
how did you come to start this collective?
Yeah, where to begin? So I, even before I came to Rotterdam and started studying psychology at Erasmus University, I was very interested in psychedelics and also the research side of it. I mean, honestly, it's like I knew that I wanted to work either as a psychedelic therapist or researcher at the end of it, but the path was not very clear cut at all, I guess, because one of the professions aren't even legal in most countries, like being a psychedelic therapist.
Mm.
And so when I came here, I immediately started to seek out other people who had similar interests. And I came across an organization in Amsterdam, which is set up by students and researchers, called the Amsterdam Psychedelic Research Association, or APRA. And I went to one of their meetings. I was really stoked, like finding out about this group. I'd been sort of looking around for similar groups for a while and met quite a few people who were interested in like only the experiential part of it, or the spiritual part of it. But here you had like people my age, also a lot of psychology students, and who were interested in the same thing. And from them, I got inspired to start something similar in Rotterdam because I thought it was a shame that there wasn't anything like this. There wasn't the environment in Rotterdam where I could discuss or learn about the substances. And also, we barely had any of it included in our curriculum, which I was not expecting. I thought here's like the most interesting thing I ever came across, and it's definitely psychology related, but it was barely mentioned, I guess, because it is sort of like a new field, or like the second wave of psychedelic science is now happening. The first wave was like in the 60s. So there's a lot of new research. They might have just not updated the curriculum yet. But I thought it was important that we also had an environment in Rotterdam where students and researchers and pretty much anyone interested in Rotterdam as well, who aren't necessarily students, can discuss and learn about these substances and their potential. And after some thinking, I decided to just start what is now called the Psychedelic Science Collective. And I started it by myself, just in my bedroom. I made a Facebook group first, like a private Facebook group, and invited people who I thought were interested and told them to like spread it to people they think might find something like this interesting as well. And it was a private group because I wanted people to be able to share and discuss the research, which is sort of stigmatized, especially in academia. Like, I don't know if people want to have that on their Facebook wall to their family, like, you know.
Yeah.
So I started out like that, and then I wanted to start hosting events, like lectures where I would invite researchers to talk about their topic of research, or professors, and have journal clubs and social events. And so I contacted the university and I said, like, can I just use your facilities? I thought that was okay, but apparently for organizations you have to pay quite a big sum of money to be able to do that.
Yeah.
If not, you would have to be like a registered association, which there are a bunch of criterias for, like you have to have existed for so and so long and whatnot. So because of that, and because I didn't have the money to fund this myself, I just started sort of investigating other opportunities, um, such as becoming a registered association, but that seemed a little bit unrealistic in the beginning. So actually, my student advisor was the one who told me about Students for Students, which you are from, uh, and that there is this group at the university who will give funding, practical and financial funding, um, to initiatives who try to innovate education. And like, that's literally exactly what I'm doing. So I got in touch and had a meeting with your team, who were, yeah, excited about the idea, and then the collective was sort of, yeah, initiated properly. And I now had the resources to use the facilities at the university. I had financial um, funding and practical help from Student for Students, which was so crucial. Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
that's kind of how it got started. And then also uh, I was in contact with the people from APRA, because it kind of became like a partner organization of their organization, because we have the similar aims and values. And um, Marco Akil, who's the founder of APRA, got me
Mhm.
in contact with two guys, one of whom is now still my teammate, who I'm doing this thing with, Joshan Seilmans. So we've been, yeah, essentially making all the events and advertisements and posters and shit like this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so, what is like the ultimate mission of the Psychedelic Science Collective?
Well, the mission is to provide education on the topic to students at our university, but then also generally in Rotterdam. So that's kind of our target audience. Um, and also we want to open up for like critical discussion around these subjects. So that's also why we want to host journal clubs. We've hosted a few now. So a journal club would be like, you gather a group of, say, 20 people, and everybody reads the same scientific paper beforehand. Say, for example, somebody did a study on depression and how psilocybin can affect depression. And
Mm.
then we all read it together, and then we critically kind of evaluate it and discuss it. And I think that's also important. And in that way, you can also kind of get to know each other better, and um, also learn how to be critical. And I think it just has a lot of benefits.
Mm. And so, do you actively, are you actively, so for example, I had interviews with the Rethink Economics Association, and
Yeah.
what they kind of try to do is to really integrate the novel theories into their regular curriculum. Is that also you're trying to like fight for, like to not only like have that like as supplementary like the journal clubs or whatever, but also to have that really in the curriculum? Is that like something you're trying to negotiate with the university or the psychology department?
Yeah, so that is actually something I've thought about and we have discussed. Um, it is not that easy to change the curriculum. However, luckily Yoshan is actually a regular lecturer for one of our courses in cognitive psychology. So my teammate, he's does like one lecture a year or something like this. So he kind of has a foot in the door when it comes to knowing people who actually deal with this stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it's definitely like on our minds to try to maybe get a lecture in somewhere, um, which I think would be like amazing. But then still, we would like to continue doing this on campus, on the side of that, because there's a lot to be said and a lot of new research coming out, which is important to, especially for psychology students and like medicine students who I think will have to deal with this in their profession at some points.
Mm.
But yeah, so I would love to see this integrated into the curriculum. Right now, I don't really know exactly how we are going to do that, but it is on the table for sure.
Okay. Um, And so as you talk about how you try to get the facilities and the help from S4S, like I don't mean this question really with respect to S4S, but more of the university and the general public involved. Like, was it hard to establish yourself, for example, at university, because of some sort of prejudice? You already talked about the prejudice, or was there like stigma because it's drug associated or psychedelic
Yeah.
associated? So was there like weird stigma with this respect?
Um, Actually, I was very surprised at how little. Actually, there was no pushback for me to do this at all, and I thought there would be. I was very prepared to have to convince a lot of people to do this, and especially getting like financial funding from the university to do it. That was not. I was not even thinking that was possible. Like everything from my student advisor to who was the first person at university who I kind of approached with this to the people as students for students and everybody who has reacted to it.
Mm.
I literally haven't gotten any pushbacks or kind of critical comments on it. Um, though it's definitely true that there is a lot of stigma surrounding psychedelics also within academia, which is now more and more going away. But back to the question about our mission, that's also one of our sort of intentions to, through this, yeah, dissolve some of the stigma surrounding these substances, which I think is very important, and that we can have like an honest, open conversations about the good and the bad,
Mm.
which is also something that we want to do, like not only focus on the benefits, but also maybe what are risks that we have to be cautious about. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I also want to get to that eventually about the risks and potential dangers. But so with this experience, do you think, based on saying that it was actually all pretty good and people were not that reluctant and detached, do you think in the Netherlands drugs and psychedelics are are viewed as more or are more accepted in, for example, the surrounding countries like or in neighboring countries?
um, yes, this seems to be the case. So I'm not really sure about how the laws are for individual European countries, but the Netherlands, I think it's the only northern country at least that has where psilocybin is legal. So truffles you can buy in like a smart
Mhm.
shop,
And
and
that is legal in Scandinavia, for example.
that is illegal.
Illegal, okay.
Yeah, I think also growing it yourself is quite punishable. Uh, and in America too, this is the case. Um, but the Netherlands just, I don't know, seems to have quite just are very open-minded about these kinds of things. So this is like kind of a hub in Europe for a lot of psychedelic research, like
Mm.
which is good because that's kind of what we try to do to get researchers and people to come and talk for
Yeah,
us. So it's easy to just kind of have them be on a train for 20 minutes and then they're here.
they're in the right country.
Yeah, and for example, they're now doing a really big trial in Utrecht at the medical center where are taking patients who are treatment resistant depressive, and so they've tried like say antidepressants
Mm.
and cognitive behavioral therapy or things like this, and then they are giving them like a few psilocybin mushroom doses. Though they don't actually eat the mushrooms, they have like the psilocybin extracted in like
Mm,
yeah.
mm,
But and then they're going to see how this has an effect. And previous studies have had very promising results, so hopefully this will be in line with that. And then in Maastricht, at Maastricht University, they're doing research with like DMT and 5-MeO DMT and MDMA and LSD and psilocybin, but more like experimental stuff,
mm.
like on cognition. And there's been some microdosing research in Amsterdam, Leiden. Now a new study just opened in Tilburg, and yeah, so a bunch of stuff is going on here, and hopefully this will spread more throughout the neighboring countries.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So, as you talk about these benefits and the sort of research being done, is there some sort of proven benefits in terms of psychological health or psychological problems that you know about that are like sort of the facts you maybe want to tell us about, like if certain substances do help with depression or you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to mention, like, so there was like a first wave of psychedelic research which happened in the 60s, and so there is quite a bit of research on, for example, death anxiety. So people with like a terminal illness, who are anxious about death, were given, say, LSD, and then didn't have any death anxiety anymore. At this time, the scientific standards weren't that high as it is today.
Mm,
So in some sense, like you have to think about that. Like the new wave of psychedelic research is still sort of in its infancy, but there are definitely like a lot of promising results. And I think one good example is what's happening in America. Um, so there's a guy named Rick Doblin who wanted psychedelics to be, yeah, that people could be able to prescribe psychedelic therapy to people with depression and things like that. So he actually, I think he studied something governance related, and kind of like through infiltrating the system, got in a position where he's now able to do these like rigorous clinical trials with MDMA for
mm,
PTSD, which is now in one of its last, if not the last phase of getting approved
okay.
as a therapy for that. And
And
so,
so they probably, just to make sure, they probably are aiming to do that on ex-military people, right?
yeah, a lot of the studies have been there. I think it's also a strategic way to go because there is a lot of stigma surrounding these substances, and a lot of them are in Schedule 1, which
Mm,
means that they are deemed as not having any therapeutic value at all.
mm,
So, I mean, in America especially, there's a lot of veterans, and nobody can say that they don't have sympathy for these people who are suffering from like PTSD from war or whatever, and there is not that great treatments available. So MDMA has been like so effective in treating PTSD for these people, and not necessarily just people who are war victims, but in general. And I think this will also be, if this gets approved as a therapy, then it will be easier for things like psilocybin therapy or LSD therapy or
so it's gonna be the gateway.
yeah, it kind of opens up possibilities, I think.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's interesting, especially in respect to the PTSD, which is in fact a huge problem in US. But I think there already might be a state where they legalized truffles or some sort of mushrooms in the United States.
Yeah, a lot of states are now decriminalizing it.
Hmm.
I don't know exactly if it's like,
I think Colorado and the West Coast are kind of on the
yeah,
front of these liberalizing movements.
yeah.
Anyways,
I don't know what that means for like being able to sell it in a store exactly, like they do here.
the technicalities, but I think there is already one state where it is allowed, but I'm not
Yeah,
entirely sure.
yeah,
Um, so I also wanted to ask you, besides the medical and sort of psychological benefits, which you talk about, and which a lot of the research you just talked about is concerned with. I was also like curious about the spiritual side of psychedelics and their effect on consciousness and their sort of some sort of catharsis effects on the consciousness. And so I heard about, for example, the ayahuasca ceremony, during which you drink some sort of elixir. Uh, and many public intellectuals such as Sam Harris talk about that a lot. So I
Yeah.
was curious because I still don't know too much about it. If you could enlighten us, and if you know about this.
Yeah. So ayahuasca is something I don't have any personal experience with, but I know that it is sort of like an elixir or a mix of two plants. One plant which contains DMT, which is dimethyltryptamine, which is a very potent psychedelic substance, which
Mm,
can be also vaporized. A lot of people do that and they have like a 10-minute trip or something like this.
okay.
But if you mix it with this other plant, which has something called an MAOI inhibitor, then um, it's it allows your body to take it up, and you go on more like a 6-8 hour journey. I think it is,
Yeah.
which I think is maybe a little bit milder in intensity compared to vaporizing DMT, but don't quote me on that. Um, and it's usually done in these kind of ritualistic settings. So this is like a practice that has been done for I think thousands of years by like indigenous people in Peru and the Amazon in general. And you usually do it with a shaman who is a person who has devoted their whole life to this, what they call a medicine. And yeah, you usually do it in groups of people. So you will be in like a circle laying down, and then there's a lot of purging involved, which is supposed to be quite healing. So a lot of purging, like vomiting and diarrhea and things like this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's quite like not necessarily, but I think more often than not that happens. But
And
people
is that
experience like,
the side effect?
sorry, what?
So is that the aim? Is that like supposed to happen, or is that does that happen because
It is a
that's a
side
sort of
effect.
symbolic getting away from the bad stuff, or
Yeah, it is just a part of the experience a lot of times, and I think a lot of people find it to be kind of like purifying, as if they're kind of purging out bad emotions or trauma or pain. I've
yeah.
heard people describe it as. So a lot of people see that as a positive effect. But I mean that's also different from the whole psychedelic experience you're having, which is
Mm,
can be extremely visual and like altering your thoughts. I mean, your whole consciousness is essentially altered. But there are studies showing that, I don't know exactly which, but that they have a lot of good effects on people that are long lasting. So this is definitely also something that will be studied more in the future.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you say you don't have you don't have experience with this particular ceremony or this particular substance. I was curious if you were comfortable telling us a little bit about the experiences you did have or things you did have experience with. And yeah, what did that allow you to see, or how was that experience? And perhaps if that somehow changed you or formed you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, it's hard for me to pin down, like, I would say that my earliest experiences were definitely the most transformative and life-changing because it made me realize a lot of things about myself. And it was so at this time I was 18, um, in the last year of my high school degree when I started experimenting after a whole year of like really heavily researching it, which was actually a great idea. Really advise that, like, if you're gonna, I'm not condoning the use of this, but like if you are gonna go out, please do your research and know what you're getting yourself into because they're really powerful experiences that should be taken, yeah, with care and hopefully in a good setting, which is mostly what I did. I would usually like go with a friend, pack my backpack with like food and water, know my dose, and go into the forest for a hike, and then usually have like a destination, which was many hours away. So you're
Mm.
hiking towards a place, so you kind of feel like you have a purpose, which for me at least has been really a useful way to not get so confused and kind of caught up in too much of the external stuff, or like having to figure out what to do. And yeah, it's like hard to tell exactly what happened, but it just completely altered my way of viewing the world. I think it made me more centered and present, and it kind of stripped away a lot of layers of bullshit
Mm-hmm.
of my personality or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like the more and more of these powerful experiences I've had, it feels like I'm getting closer to my core, sort of. Um, yeah. Though I have never tried any psychedelic in like a therapeutic setting, like with a therapist where, I mean, there's a lot of centers like this in the Netherlands also now where you can go and pay some money and then you have like a trip sitter and a whole program sort
Oh,
of.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And the therapists are like rather passive. So usually you'll have like blinds on with music to listen to and then just kind of journeying into yourself, which I'm really curious to do. Um, and I think that might be also a better way to really work on some shit. Because if you're going around in the forest or like being with other people, it's easy to kind of put your attention externally
Mm-hmm.
instead of internally. So I feel like I definitely have a lot of exploring left to do in my mind. There are definitely like an infinite amount of nooks and crannies that are,
Mm.
yeah, left unexplored.
So you still have many more opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And yeah, I have definitely lately been more interested in trying something like that. It wasn't necessarily something that appealed to me for that long. But I do want to try to go to like some kind of retreat. It may be like an ayahuasca retreat or like a psilocybin retreat or something like this to see what that would be like.
And is there for you any fears associated with this? Are you like afraid you could see something super depressing or dark, or just that the experience is terrifying? Do you have these fears?
I would say I have those fears every time before I go into a psychedelic trip, and that's why they're also so anti-addictive. Because it's like you get out of a trip and it's super overwhelming and emotional, and it's just like, man, I'm not gonna do that in a long ass time. That's like, it's such like for me, it has never been like this light, happy thing. It's always quite a heavy experience. So every time I go into it, I know that, but then try to kind of accept whatever comes. Because if you're trying to resist it while it's happening, it just can become quite hellish. Um, I think so. Just trying to let go and let whatever happens, good or bad, happen. Then I've and other people, I think, will gain a lot from that.
Mm,
Yeah.
okay. And so, in terms of you kind of told us about your sort of what came out of the experiences, right? What you learned and how you changed.
Yeah.
And in terms of the actual experiences throughout uh, the experience, um, one of the most spoken about, or like the famous phenomenons or the sensations talked about during psychedelic use, are the feeling of deep connection to some collective being uh, or some higher intelligence, and seeing oneself from the third person's view. So, is that something you have experienced, or is that something that
Wait,
that?
sorry, I completely lost you there.
Oh,
Can you
okay, I can just
can you repeat
yeah,
the question?
yeah, for sure. So, one of the mostly spoken about experiences, or the biggest sort of phenomenons in terms of psychedelic use, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I heard, are sort of a deep connection or a feeling of a deep connection to some collective being or some higher intelligence, and also seeing oneself from a third person's perspective, and so just seeing yourself outside yourself in a way. So is that something you can relate to? Is that something you have experienced?
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a very common experience when taking psychedelics. Especially this feeling of your ego stripping away,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, you would call it an ego death, if it's
Yeah, I have
that's the
that.
experience of completely losing your sense of self. And in doing that, I have, and a lot of people I think experience, then merging with everybody else. Like there isn't the subject object difference anymore. You're just kind of you're sort of realizing that you actually are a part of the whole. You aren't just Anna somewhere in the universe. You're just an expression of the universe being aware and experiencing itself, which I
Yeah.
think is the common sort of realization that people have through psychedelic journeys. And and actually they've done studies on it, and it seems that in the brain it's actually mediated by a decreased activity in a part called the default mode network, which
Okay.
is sort of the seat of the ego. It's like where all self-referential processing happens. So
Mm-hmm.
it makes sense that when this
Yeah.
becomes less active, you should sort of, your ego should dissolve, and
You just
that seems to be what
turn it
happens.
off.
Yeah, and
That's
also
interesting
what's
though.
interesting is that these experiences of kind of what was it? Yeah, in one of the questionnaires in the studies that I read, they call it uh, oceanic boundlessness or something like this, which is
Okay.
this feeling of merging with everything. And this is also crucial, it seems, for the effects in therapy, like on people in depression. Like you take the psychedelic, you have that experience, and it will give good effects in decreasing your depression for a long time. And then it seems that not having the experience, this kind of unity experience, doesn't necessarily yield the same effects.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Interesting. And so I think I just from what you said, I'm also kind of wondering because I heard this term from these intellectuals such as Sam Harris or these psychologists that there's no such thing as a bad trip. Uh,
yeah,
and I think that kind of relates to what you said, right? Because you said that none of your experiences have been necessarily pleasant or like extremely pleasant, but maybe that's the point because maybe then you learn more, right? Or
yeah.
it's more constructive. So, do you agree with that statement, or do you think that there's no like scary or that there's no negative bad trip, but it's only unpleasant because of the truth in it, or
Um, I think that there are bad trips. I think a lot of bad trips aren't necessarily bad if you take the time to integrate a lot of the things that you see. I think a lot of bad trips can maybe come from like resistance to something you're realizing about yourself or some uncomfortable truth. I do think though that taken in like a really wrong set and setting, so say you're not in a good headspace and you're at a crowded festival with like shit music or whatever, you just have like a terrible, disturbing experience. I think that's totally possible.
Mhm.
And in that sense, like if there seems to be nothing to take from it, then I would say it's a bad trip. Um, yeah, I don't know the word itself. I mean, I think there are definitely trips that aren't beneficial
Okay.
if it's in the wrong set and setting. So that's crucial, definitely to
Hmm.
yeah,
Okay.
psychedelic exploration.
Mhm. And so, as we kind of talked about the resistance and the stigma associated with psychedelics, not necessarily in the Netherlands, but more in the general populace or society. I was wondering if you believe that somehow the system or the establishment does not desire drugs and mainly psychedelics to be used uh, because they do induce some sort of this alternative thinking, which can conflict with the status quo or
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, I think so. Going back to the whole first wave of psychedelic research in the '60s, the reason why the research didn't continue, like there was a huge gap from like the '70s until like a decade ago or something, and it was because the psychedelics, especially LSD, was like kind of fueling the counterculture, like the hippie counterculture at that time, which was perceived, I think, as a big threat by the government. I mean, Richard Nixon, I believe, who was the president at the time, declared Timothy Leary as the most dangerous man in America. And Timothy Leary was like a Harvard professor who was kind of an evangelist for psychedelics and LSD, especially, and was kind of like an icon of this
yeah.
counterculture. And so I think the shutdown was partially because these experiences kind of led to people having, yeah, kind of these anti-war, peace and love feelings, and that maybe didn't resonate with what the government wanted at the time. And so like all research was completely shut down on these substances. Like right now, I don't necessarily think, I don't know, I don't think that is the reason. I think there's just stigma left from that time surrounding psychedelics, that people are kind of scared of talking about it. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And so as you say that maybe psychedelics and this the society or the culture around them is kind of making people more against war, more loving and compassionate or whatever. Do you believe that the society would improve as a whole if psychedelics were just more widely accepted and more used?
Yes, definitely.
What do you
I think so. Um, I really think so. Not just on like a therapeutic level, which is really important because it seems to have great effects on like depression and PTSD and many things like this, which is a huge problem. Like depression is really like a huge problem in the world right now, which I think it could really help alleviate. But also for people who aren't necessarily depressed or something like this, I think there's definitely some certain values in the psychedelic community which I think would benefit the greater world population to have.
think?
It seems that people generally become more connected to nature and to others, and yeah, to the planet, to which will that comes with certain attitudes which I think are important to have right now in times of climate change and war. And I definitely think that it's not like the one solution, but uh, it is. It would contribute
Mhm.
to a better world. I think so.
Okay, cool. And my last question is aimed back at you, as I believe that the people in these interviews are interesting personalities. Um, and so I'm curious, and I was wondering, where do you see yourself in maybe 5 to 10 years, and what are your plans?
Um. So yes, my dream is the same. I would like to do psychedelic research or therapy, and like 3 years ago, that path didn't seem obvious at all, and now it's starting to kind of crystallize more and more. I think especially being here in the Netherlands where these things are actually happening, there are like the possibilities there for me to work with these substances. But at first, I'm still a bachelor student, about to finish. So I want to do my master's. I'm applying for like a half clinical, half research master right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I get both sides, but that is in Denmark. So there's not much going on there with regards to psychedelic research or therapy. So I think my path might lead back to the Netherlands in 5 years. Or if not, wherever I am or end up for whatever reason, I see myself then trying to, say I was to move back to Norway, where I'm from, and nothing is really. Well, actually, they now have a Norwegian Association for Psychedelic Science, which is amazing. So maybe they're already kind of getting shit going. But being a part of like starting some studies or working for the same kind of freedom and science that they have here, I think would be maybe also a possibility.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, it's hard to say. I don't really know exactly.
Okay, but do you want to stick to this field and to this, to this interest?
Yeah, it is definitely the most interesting thing I've ever come across. So unless something comes
More
in my
interesting.
way, which I can't see it doing, then I will definitely stick with this field.
Okay.
For sure, and trying to help the new psychedelic renaissance in the ways that I can.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for watching. If anyone has managed to finish this, this has been the 4th episode of the Founders Interviews by S4S, and thank you to Anna Olsen and the Psychedelic Science Collective.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.